your computers. Somebody's talking and in the background. Let's see who's not muted besides me. Okay, it sounds like we've all muted up. And this is Austin-Healey BS, and it's something that the Austin-Healey Club of New England does regularly to try to keep interest going in Healey's and in the Healey Club. And we try to get some guests of interest, and we're very fortunate tonight to have Roger Moment as our guest. And for those of you who don't know Roger, Roger has been involved with Healey's for many, many years. And I have first met Roger in person in 1991 at the Austin-Healey Club Northeast Region conclave at Sturbridge. And he was judging concours big Healeys, and I was judging along with a couple other folks, sprites. And also we were all part of the Austin-Healey mailing list, which is still in existence. And before there were forums and Zoom and all this other stuff, this is how Healey people communicated across the world with one another, and did something very similar, but this is a much easier way to do it these days. So at any rate, we're going to have a way to do this today that might be a little different than we usually do it. Usually we do a Q&A at the end. However, Roger has graciously agreed to take questions as we go along. So if you, when Roger stops speaking, if you want to ask a question on something particular about he's mentioning, feel free to ask a question, and we'll see how that works out. So, first of all, to start out, Roger, tell us a little bit about yourself. Where were you born? Where did you go to school? Where you live now, and the type of jobs you held?
Well, I was born in San Francisco in 1938. And my dad moved up to Portland, Oregon 2 years later. And so I grew up there. He was interested in skiing, so he got me on skis, and starting with that somewhere between the ages of 2 and 4. And I graduated from high school there. I went to Reed College, which is a small liberal arts college in Portland. And from there, I went to graduate school in metallurgy. I majored in physics at Reed, and I went to metallurgy graduate school at Yale. But metallurgy has many, many flavors. There's everything from extraction metallurgy to get how you get the metal from the ore, to the smash 'em and bash 'em, how you beat it into shapes and stamp parts out of it and weld it and all that stuff. And then there's a lot of what's going on in the metals, like with the alloys, what makes them stronger, what gives them their properties. And then I got involved in my research. I got a master's and doctorate degree in that field, but it was more like solid state physics. And I was growing crystals of sodium chloride and actually measuring electrical conductivity to determine porosity and the boundaries between the individual crystal grains in a piece of material. So that's the background of my schooling. And when I got out of graduate school, which was in '63, at those years, big companies would send people around to colleges, universities, to interview, and they would post things on the bulletin boards. And so I looked at one. Dow Chemical had something at a place called Rocky Flats, which sounded horribly horrible, but it was located in Colorado. So I decided to sign up for the interview, and they brought me out. And the minute I saw that I was on the edge of the Rocky Mountains, I decided I was going to do everything possible in my interview out there to get them to hire me. And I've been there for 30 years. I retired from doing that. I was doing research on plutonium, beryllium, non-destructive testing. And I also took a stint working, they won a contract. The head of R&D wanted to had used the advanced degree people to do other things, and so the DOE had a request for proposals for people to do a small wind energy conversion program where they were going to be developing new windmills of small sizes for electrical. This is back in 1975. And so I did that for 9 years. And then when they moved that down to the Solar Energy Research Institute, I stayed on being a program manager for all the R&D going on at the facility. And then they decided that us old guys were getting a little bit too complacent. So they gave us a golden parachute to get rid of us. And from 92 on, I was doing a little bit of consulting. And then after about 2000, I spent time doing some restoration work on other people's cars as kind of a part-time thing and whatever. Now I'm trying to get back into skiing and tennis.
When did you first get interested in automobiles?
Pardon?
When did you first get interested in automobiles?
Probably in the 40s when I was, my mother found these kits for building. They were paper and wood and plastic wheels of, I remember there was one of a railway express truck, but then there were others. There was a Model T and a Stutz Bearcat and the early brass model cars. And my dad threw all that stuff away when I was off at college. I never really felt comfortable about that happening, but nevertheless, that was my interest. And then in high school, all my buddies, they were all into hot rods and I wasn't. But then at college, before I got into college, in the neighborhood where Reed was, we lived there, there was a fellow who was putting a V8 engine transplant into a 39 Ford or something. And he was had a what is that chain hoist, the compound chain hoist that has two diameters, you can, raise and lower. But anyway, he hung that from a big branch on an old chestnut tree. So literally under the chestnut tree, I learned, and I was his helper. I didn't know much of what was going on, but I was helping. And so that was kind of cool. And that was
called shade tree engineering.
Pardon?
Shade tree engineering.
That's right. Shade tree engineering. It was cool. It was just about 5 blocks away. I would go there on weekends or after school when he was doing there, and we spent, I don't know how long, maybe it was in the summer when we did this.
And what was the first car that you owned?
First car that I owned was a Volkswagen Beetle. And that's what I drove up to Sturbridge in 2. It had 36 horsepower, and I tried to get the most mileage out of every gallon of gas, even though gas was all of 25 cents a gallon in those days. That was 1960, I guess it was.
How about your first Healy? When did you get your first Healy?
Well, I think everybody who's watching probably remembers in 1966, Mrs. Robin Hood, when Dustin Hoffman was the graduate. Dustin Hoffman was given a Alfa Romeo boat-tailed Spider for his graduation from college. And he had this affair going with Mrs. Robin Hood, and he was also dating her daughter, unknown to her, of course. And I just thought that boat-tailed Spider was the neatest sports car I'd seen since the XKE. And so I was working at the Rocky Flats at the time, but I didn't have the money to buy a new sports car anyway. So my buddies, one had a Fiat 124 Spider, another one had a Triumph TR3 that he drove actually almost every day through the winter and everything. Unbelievable. He'd come to work with woolly hats on, and he didn't even have a top on, the damn thing. But anyway, so I wanted to get a sports car. It turned out that there was a fellow at graduate school at CU who had an Austin-Healey that he wanted to sell. And I think he wanted $450 for it. It was a 1958 BN6 two-seater. And so that was an affordable car, but I had to do the fixing up, but I wanted to, and I wasn't as skilled as I am now, but I wanted to learn, and I had the aptitude to learn on that stuff. So I did everything. Well, I used fiberglass for repairs. That was the level of my body experience then. And I did transplant an engine from a junkyard of a 67, this is in 69. So there was a 67 BJ8 that was parked on a corner that a car had rounded the corner and hit it hard in the left rear. And the thing ended up in the junkyard with 13,000 miles on it. And I got the engine from it for $125. And I put that in my BN6. And I repainted it as well, all myself too.
Was there anything particular about the Healeys that you liked?
About the what?
Healeys, Austin-Healeys.
Well, at the beginning, I didn't know about Austin-Healey's in particular at all, but it was a sports car. It was cheap. And when I was sitting in it, and when I had the gearbox cover off, I was watching the road passing by under the gearbox and all. And it was just kind of an exciting thing. And, you know, for a relatively young kid or guy, it was something to get started in. And because I could do all the work on it and I got it working pretty good, I kind of kept going with that brand.
How many Austin-Healeys have you owned altogether?
Well, that was my first one. My second one was I think it was a 61 BN7 two-seater also, but I got it for, I think, $300 because the overdrive wasn't working. So when I changed out the overdrive, that made it good, but then I also fixed it up cosmetically as well. And then from there, the next one I got was my BN1. And that I got from, that's an interesting car. It was bought new by a US serviceman in September of 55. It was built in July of 55. And a year later, he sold it to get money to go to CU. And a friend of mine who was in the ski patrol bought it, and he had it. And then he had it for many, many years. And I said, I'd kind of like to buy it. He drove me up skiing once in the winter in the darn thing. And so he eventually sold it to me in 74. And then I've been driving, and that was my third one. And the last one I got was a car. It was a 1960 BT7 that had been bought new. The original owner had it. He had had it parked on a street in Boulder, Colorado for literally months or years. And it had a dent in one front fender on the left side where somebody had slid into it, I guess, in the winter. But anyway, so I asked him if he wanted to sell that one because it was a one-owner car and it hadn't been driven for literally decades. And he said, oh, I'm going to fix it up. And finally, one day, I met his wife and she said that Brian, he'd like to sell his car. And I said, fine. And in the book, that's the car that you see that I was the garage find up in the introduction part of the book. But anyway, so I got that. And that car had never been apart. And so that was the first car that I really got serious about trying to really replicate back to the way it was when new.
So how did you get into doing concours?
Well, when I started fixing up these cars, and I would say, you know, fixing up is what I did with them initially. I would repaint them. I would put new upholstery in them. I rebuilt the engine on the BN1 as well. And I also did it on the BT7 I had. And I would go, and I finally joined a local club. I hadn't been a member of any local club. And I would see other cars and they would look a hell of a lot nicer than mine. And I thought I want to need to make mine at least look right. And as I got talking with people, they would bring up a question about, well, this is what it was originally and so forth. And it was actually, I joined the USA, Austin-Healey Club USA, which was originally the Austin-Healey Club Pacific Center. It was the English club had what they call centers for different local clubs in England, I guess. And out in California, they applied to become a California center for that club, and they did that. And I got to know people there. I was missing side curtains for my 100, and they had a place where they had parts to sell, and I was able to pick those up from them. And I just, as I got to read the magazine, and I would see articles about what was correct, I started to get more and more interested in that because I could fix the cars up to run. But then I was thinking a little bit more about what it was like back in the 50s when they were built and why they were, what were the unique about them and what was unique about automotive technology and engineering at those years. And so that's how I got my interest peaked on it. And then in '89, Gary Anderson, who maybe some of you all know, had gotten together with Rick Regan, who was in an Ontario club in Canada. He had drafted something of a concours guideline, a very crude thing, because he was perturbed about the way that judging at Healey concourses was very subjective. And a lot of things were wrong that nobody picked up on. And a lot of people were bragging about all they knew and they didn't know as much and so forth. And so Gary Anderson finally said, well, why don't we try and build a concours registry and we create a good guidelines to let people use for research if they wanted to restore their car accurately. And I got involved with that at the beginning. And my role was that people would say, well, this is what it was supposed to be. And Gary wanted it to be written up in a way that people would understand it when they would read the guidelines. So I wrote up a lot of articles, and as I was working on my cars, I also discovered a lot of things that people didn't know, or I learned that other people didn't seem to know. And so I wrote articles about that. And that led to more and more articles that I wrote starting in the 80s and continuing on. And then with the concours guidelines and a lot of people who are more knowledgeable than me sharing with me information, I decided to, and I was documenting it up as I wrote the actual entries for the guidelines. I just decided to pay more attention to the details. And so as I moved along, I kind of inched closer and closer to being, more meticulously interested in every little thing.
It's funny when you mention the Austin-Healey Club Pacific Center and the Austin-Healey Club in the UK. The Austin-Healey Club of New England started out as a center for the Austin-Healey Club USA. And then eventually we turned into the Austin-Healey Club of America. We joined them, but we started out as a center like the Pacific Center. Why do you think it's important to have a concours car?
Well, as we were talking before, concours now is kind of what people want to think about it to be. And it's one term you associate with it is perfection. And I believe that, yes, the quality of craftsmanship is a large part of what people are looking for and expect when they go to a concours. But that doesn't mean that they're necessarily accurate. And as we started, and when we put our concours program together for the Healey community, we decided that a couple of things we were going to do with it. Number one, the judging was not going to be so heavily subjective. It was going to be 60%. We broke everything down in the car. If you want to go to the concours registry, you can get a copy of that, which is about 280 pages now. And I've did an awful lot of the writing of what's in that, and a lot of the photographs gathering that people gave me and I took too. But what that thing had grown to be was a documentation of every time we learned something new, we would also correct as well as correct things that were wrong that we discovered, or else we also added to what we already had in it. And as I got working on this and working on my own car, I restored my car 3 times. Well, I did a cosmetic restoration in 75 or 74. And I did a, what happened here? Can you hear me okay?
Yep, you're fine.
I did a cosmetic restoration then. And then after I'd been with the Healey Club for a while and I saw how much cleaner and more perfect other cars were, I put my car up on jack stands and I crawled underneath and cleaned it all off and used the spray can to spray the frame on it. And then I went for 91, the 40th anniversary car show that was held in Breckenridge, Colorado. I decided my car needed a lot of things that I had not done wrong when I had fixed it up back in 74. So I redid it again, but very thoroughly, or sort of. And then after that concours, I realized I learned so much more about things that were wrong with it, but I took it apart again in 99, and I redid it for the last major time and took it out to Lake Tahoe for 2002. But actually what got me doing it in 99 was I had my brakes lock up on me or stick up on me. That's a characteristic that's unique to the way the 100 brake master cylinder is designed. And what I did was I kept rebuilding the master cylinder, and then it would only go for maybe 2 or 3 years because I use silicon brake fluid, which tends to make the rubber swells more, that old rubber style compound. And so I decided, well, I'm going to get my car and really do every damn little detail absolutely as perfect as I can. And at the same time that I decided to do that, it turned out a very good friend of mine had bought a 100 from off of eBay that had never been apart except for a little preliminary work when the owner wanted to take it apart. He got as far as taking the interior out, and that's it. And so I decided that, okay, the fasteners, and I've been talking to a fellow, Kurt Arndt, who's very interested in the fastener aspect of the cars. But I went and I talked to him and learned about the different makes and how the fasteners were marked. They're forged, the heads are forged. They have manufacturers' names forged in most of them. Some of them are plain except for the code R or B, which is or S, which is the strength code that the Brits used. Like we have a code, we have 3, 5, and 8 used on American fasteners. But anyway, so I decided while we're taking this apart, we would go through and I would make, for every fastener we took apart, I would measure the diameter, note the thread type, the length of the bolt, the hex head, whether it was BSF or UNF, and so forth. And we made a documentation of like about 95% of all the fasteners on that car, which I put into a spreadsheet. And I sorted it by where the location was. I sorted it by who the manufacturer was, what the color was of the finish was on the fastener. Some of them were painted body color, some were painted engine color, some were painted black, some were just in zinc, and so forth. And so I knew now that when so I said, I can do the car. I could go and try and find all these original fasteners, ho, ho, ho. And then maybe I can get my car even that much more accurate in those little nth detail. And so it turns out that I found somebody who I went to talk to a couple of shops that I knew that had Healey shops. And I asked him if they had any old original fasteners. And I found a guy who had a whole bunch of them. He sent me 3 or 4 5-gallon plastic, I don't know, they're like they're plastic things that you get either at Home Depot or that would have drywall mud in them or things like that. He sent me those buckets, and at that point, I would take and I would sort through them. I would take out a handful of bolts every morning before I went to work, and every night when I got home, I'd take out about maybe a couple of handfuls, and I would sort them out. And of the ones that were all genuine British and not in ratty condition, I would put them in phosphoric acid to get rid of the rust. I would then take them and I would wire brush them to clean them up, and I put them in a bucket. And I would, when I had a coffee can full of both things, I would take them into a shop. They would refinish them all for me. And from that, and then what I did was I gave him, I was more interested in the BSF fasteners, which are black phosphated for their finish, but the place I sent them to could do that as well as zinc. And so what I did was I traded him the couple ones that I kept. I sent him a whole bunch of buckets of the UNF fasteners that were all refinished by me. And so that's how I ended up getting a large selection. And then when I went down my list of all the fasteners that were on this other car, I could identify which ones I needed. And I fortunately actually had, between the few that there were a lot of original ones on my car, but there were a lot more that I was able to get out of this collection. So I was able to put this, get all the fasteners sorted out. And then somebody else later on told me that, well, they could make me a mask for the etching on the windshields for the triplex glass. And so we had some masks made up, and then there was a place that they could use, I think it was like an airbrush, but they used a very fine grit, carbide grit or whatever, and they could mask on the windshield and they could etch using this grit. And so I have the correct logo on my windshield. And I would just go, as time went on, every time I found something new, like when we were at Sturbridge in '91, I don't know if you remember, but Alec, what the heck was his name? Silverman. He built boats in Rhode Island, and he brought in a BN1 that had a new old stock sage green top on it. And that's the thing that is a beautiful top. Sage green is only available now in a leather cloth or a vinyl that you can use for interior that isn't strong enough for a soft top. But anyway, he had that, and he had an original rear window which had the heat stamped logo for, I think it's I don't know if it's triplex or no, it isn't triplex, but whatever it was anyway. And I got photographs of that. And then when I later on in the early 2000s, I had a graphic artist friend take and make me a black on white image on paper of what that heat press was. And I went and had before that, when I had the hard top for my BT7, the rear window has the word Perspex with quotation marks around it, stamped in it. And I wanted to put that in my window. So I found an original one, he did the logo for that. And there was a company that did bookbinding, and they made me up a stamp for doing the foil stamping for the word Perspex. And I mounted that on a steel piece that I welded up with a bar, and I could heat it up hot enough that it would be able to imprint into the plastic of the window. And I was able to put Perspex into my hard top, and I did the same thing for the soft top. So, one thing led to another, and I keep finding new little things that I didn't have, and I kept doing it detail by detail. But my 100 was the ultimate thing. But then I also did my 3000 to the same level because it had never been apart, and I was able to.
Well, Roger, you obviously you've gone to a great deal of lengths to do this and make sure the parts were correct. Why do you think that's important for you or anyone else to do that?
Well, it depends on how you want to look at the car. If you want to look at the car as a beautiful thing that you can drive that's old and people like to admire, it doesn't matter. If you look at the car as something that reflects on the technology, the industry capabilities of some 30, 40, 50, 60 years ago, then it's a curiosity that, you know, this is the way, these are the companies, Newton, Wiley, Bees. I can't remember with my memory all the different brand names of the bolts, but they had them, and it's nice to do it. When you look at the Phillips screws, the original Phillips screws that were machine screws had BA threads on them, and they just had a plain Phillips head. But then when they introduced the unified screw system in 53 or so, 52, 53, the screws, the machine screws, pan head machine screws with a Phillips head cross in them, they looked the same as the BA thread ones. They weren't BSF, they were BA thread, 2BA, 3BA, and so forth. And so the people on the assembly line had to know the difference, because the fuel system used BA threads and electrical stuff used BA threads, and but the screws that were used to attach, say, the shroud to the risers or to the firewall or the wings and such down on the lower flanges, they used UNF threads. And so the workman on the line needed to be able to know when he picked up a 1032 screw, whether it was a BA threads or whether it was a UNF thread. And the way they did that was between the cross points, they put little radial stamped grooves. They're really, really thin, but they put them in those. No, pardon me. That was when they went to Posidrive. Between the cross points, they put a little arc or a dash between the tips of the Phillips head screws. And that told them that it was a Phillips head UNF thread and it was not a BA thread. Subsequently, in 63, 64, when they introduced Posidrive, they didn't, instead of the little dash between the tips, they put a radial spoke, very fine radial spoke. And that's how you can tell a Posidrive from a Phillips. But the only difference to them is the way the screwdriver nests into the cross point, because the threads are 1032 in both cases. You know, it's a little, but that's a practical thing. So then I get thinking, okay, if you want to get your details right, another thing is if you take the car into a shop and they are trying to figure out your wiring, for example, or if they're trying to figure out what kind of fasteners you use, because on the BN1s, for example, there's a lot of BSF on the BN2s. They moved over to using UNF on the bolts, except for the, with the BN2 gearbox that has its UNF bolts, but the 100 engine and for both of those cars use BSF fasteners, and the high point rear axle used UNF, but the spiral bevel had BSF and so forth. But if you're taking a car in to have it worked on and the people don't pay attention or think about these little details, if you don't have the right stuff in it, and they go to look it up in a workshop manual or what they think it's supposed to be, and they don't find it, it's just going to take longer for them to get it right. And I know that on my engine, when I took my 100 engine, when I went to drop the oil pan to work on it, I found some people had run some 1032 UNF thread screws up into the 2BA threads in the flange of the block, because they didn't know any better and they cross-threaded things. And you know, if you're working on the car and you've got your tools, you want to know, do I need a Whitworth or BSF wrench, or do I need to have a UNF one, and so forth. It makes the job that you do easier. And this is one aspect of the answer to your question. Makes the job you do easier, the jobs that the shops do on your car go easier, which can also cost you less. But the other thing is that there are some people that really care about originality. And you can maybe get a better price for your car if someone's looking at it and you point out these are all original fasteners. And they say, oh, wow, you know, that's kind of cool. Not that it matters to them necessarily, but it's one little thing. So that's kind of a long summation of a variety of reasons why I could say brings you more money, or you get more interest in learning about the history of the cars or whatever.
What would you say to someone that says, I want to drive my car, I don't want a Trailer Queen concours car?
You what?
Say, I'd like to drive my Healey. I don't want a Trailer Queen. I don't want a concours car. I don't want to be cleaning it with Q-tips all the time. And
2019, a friend of mine from, well, John Hodgman and his wife came out to Boulder, Colorado, or near there where we live. We hopped in my 100. My wife drove our X1 with his wife. John and I drove my 100, 400 miles up to Sturbridge, pardon me.
Tahoe?
No, it's up in South Dakota.
Sturgis.
Sturgis. No, it wasn't Sturgis. It was
No?
it was another town near Sturgis. But anyway, we drove up there 75, 80 miles an hour, 2-lane roads, beautiful, a little bit on the high 4-lane, but mostly on 2-lane. Wyoming has terrific 2-lane roads. Had a ball. No, not a problem whatsoever. I drive my car every year, and then I go in every 2 years. I maybe do a thorough cleaning on the underneath, but I keep it clean. And then I entered it in concours. Now in our concours, if we drive it, we don't deduct for a little bit of dirt that they find on it. It doesn't have to be pristine. And my car has scored very well in concours all the years that I've done it. And I've done this ever since 91. I've driven that car since 91 every year, maybe 500 to 2,000 miles, and occasionally more. But in fact, my BT7, I drove that one out to Lake Tahoe in 2002. And you know, in 91, pardon me, it was in 91. I drove it to, 2,500, 3,000 miles round trip. When I sold it, or when that guy sold it here at Bring a Trailer in 2018, it looked every bit as clean as it did the day I drove it out there.
You mentioned your first book with Gary Anderson. Were you surprised at how much those books sell for now?
Let me tell you how that came into being. Motor Books International contacted Gary and asked if he wanted to do a book on Austin-Healey. They had a series of things that they were doing. So he contacted me and said, you know, you're the technical guy, I do the writing. Can we get together and do this? So we did. And that book, but then Motor Books International had a couple of criteria. Number one, it can't exceed, I don't know if it said 95 pages or whatever. Number two, all the pictures had to be in black and white. And so we did it. And we didn't know what to expect, but they were footing all the costs. And after, I don't know, 2 or 3 years, apparently it sold out and they did another reprint. They never told us that they were going to do it. In the meantime, we discovered a whole lot of errors in the book. And we said, well, we'd like to make corrections if you do a reprint. They never told us, they never made corrections. They changed the cover on the book from the blue one, which had the picture of the 3 blue and white Healey's, to a red cover with a red BJ8 that they came up with or whatever. I didn't discover that until I was visiting A.H. Spares in 2001, I think it was, or something. And I asked them, and they said, we still have your book. And I said, oh, I didn't know it was still in print. And he pulled it off the shelf and I didn't recognize it. And so when I got back, I told Gary about this, and I said, maybe you could convince them that they'd be offering us at least one complimentary copy of the new book for ourselves. And he did. And so when I look at that book and I see that, and it was following in many ways the way the concours guidelines were back at that time, except the pictures in the guidelines were all in the back in another section, of the guidelines. These had the pictures interlaced among the text, which is of course handier. And that's the way the guidelines have been for about 3 years now anyway, and much, much better. And they were all in color. But anyway, so then I was starting to see these books being sold on eBay or listed on Amazon. I didn't know what the prices were on eBay, but on Amazon, they would list it for $300, $400, $700, $900. I couldn't even imagine somebody paying that for the darn thing, because they could get the same information much better from the concours guidelines for 25. But nevertheless, what is.
I always used to kid Gary whether he had kept a bunch of them somewhere in his library to sell off once he found out how much they were going for.
Well, I don't know how many were sold at those extreme prices, but anyway, you're right.
Do you have any idea what the most expensive one ever was that got sold for?
I really don't. I really don't.
So knowing how much they've sold for, have you kept a bunch of copies of the new ones? You kept them back so you can, when they go up to $10,000 a piece, you can cash it?
Oh, no, I'll tell you, the situation with the new ones is a little bit different. I had wanted to do a book like this for a long time because I've been writing all these articles and I keep getting phone calls of people who ask me questions over and over again, different people asking the same question over and over. And I thought it's very tiring for me to spend as much time on the phone giving all the answers. So I said, I'd really like to document all this stuff in a place where people can get it in one source, but I never could try and figure out how to go about doing this. And then Jean Caron, who was one of the officers in the USA Club, said he was talking to the board and he suggested, well, let me go back for a second. Starting in 2006, and you were talking about, the Healey forums, okay? 2006, somebody had put a posting on one of the forums, and I dropped off, by the way. I wasn't participating in them from the late 90s because I just didn't have time. I was spending an inordinate amount of time answering questions, and I found myself answering the same questions every few months or years apart, and I didn't like to do that either. So this guy said, I've been restoring a car. I have all the parts completely refinished, refurbished. I'm ready to put it together. What's the order I should put it together assembly? And when I thought about that, about a day or two later, I said, Gary, I cannot write anything up on how to do that would be of any value to anybody. I thought what we need to do is we need to write a series. And so what we did was, that's how this restoration series came about, which is the first half of the book. And that restoration series started with, do you really want to do this? Are you really prepared to do this, et cetera, et cetera. And then as I got working through, all the photographs that I put in that are photos that I took of various restorations work I did. At the time, I think I was helping a guy on a BM4, and that's where some of the early stuff where we were taking the car apart was shot and so forth. But we just that's what they said. Well, we'd like to, for the USA Club, we'd like to publish your restoration series as a book and earn a little money for the club. Because as all the members get older, die off, or lose the interest, the club's shrinking, and it's hard to have enough. They don't have as many members as AHCA, for example. So I said, well, that would be really nice because I've wanted to do this. However, I've written an awful lot of topical articles that I would also like to include in the book. And they agreed to let me do that. So that's where part 2 of my book came from, because those are separate specific articles, except there's about 3 or 4 that I wrote in the last year. One of them being on the way that BJ8 or the Mark II grills go in, and another one that I reworked completely on the construction of the sills and frames and such. So that's how that book came about. So then the question was, well, how are we going to print it? And when we got it put together, and that was a real question to do. And I'm not going to go into all the details of how we did it, but we finally found a source of some money to at least get the first 450 copies printed. And those sold out up to, well, those are just about all sold out now. I think there's only 20 or 30 of those left. And when we got close to the end, I said, we really need to do a second printing of a few. And we did a second printing of a couple of hundred. And as we get more orders coming in, we will continue to print more books so that they'll be available. But I don't know what's going to happen in the future because we haven't put any of the money income from the books into the club treasury yet. We've been using that to fund the printing of the next group of books and so forth. So hopefully we're going to get to a point where we'll say enough is enough, and then I don't know what will come of it.
Well, I'm thinking that everyone knows what the book is, but in case they don't,
you're too close to something or too far from it. I'm getting an image of your.
That's not going to work. Well, anyway, it's called Tips on Maintenance, Repair, and Restoration of the Austin-Healey 100, 106, and 3000. And so you mean that this isn't, the copy that I have isn't going to be worth thousands of dollars because you keep on making more?
Well, if you think you don't need it anymore, yeah, go ahead and sell it.
Well, that's a good point. If you were going to do a Healey to concours specs, or even just to work on your Healey, what kind of literature, what kind of books would you advise having?
Well, the first thing I tell people is there's a company which you can find on the internet very easily, and I'll tell you a little bit about it right now, only because when I first was getting books from them, it was easy, and then I tried to follow their instructions and it didn't work. But it's called Books for Cars, BOOKS, the number 4 CARS, and in there they have all kinds of books on alphabetical, everything from A to Z. And so when you go on the site, on the upper left, you go and scroll down till you find Austin-Healey. And when you click on Austin-Healey, a screen will come up and it'll have 3 titles. One is going to be the model, and one will be the type of book, and one will be the year, I think. And it used to be you would go down and fill in an entry for all of those. But now you can't do that. There's only one that'll work. And I think if you put in for the Austin-Healey either 100 or 3000, and then it'll bring up a screen that tells you the type of book. And there will have some books will say manufacturer, which is the ones that are or copies of the factory manuals. They have service parts lists or parts books, but it's the actual service parts list. they have workshop manuals, and they have handbooks. Those are the three that they have. They also have Haynes and other aftermarket books as well. So you can, I tell people, the first thing you should get is you buy a service parts list for your book from the factory, and you go buy a workshop manual from the factory workshop manual. And then after that, that is a bit of a problem because they're after originality. And actually, Anders Klausager's book is very good because at the end of the section on hundreds and on the 6-cylinder cars, he has a broken down list of the change points of items on all the cars. And so you could at least know that something was different. But I have to caution you that the way the cars were built, let me digress slightly. For the hundreds, the cars originally were built up in the high tower of BMC. They would issue a chassis number, and then the chassis number would be, and that would be on the build card, and that is called the card number. And by the way, there's copies of the build cards for the early and the later hundreds, and for the 3000s and all, it's like the later hundreds, but the early hundreds were different. They would stamp BN1, BN, and then they would write in the number 1, or BN1 they did, and then write in the letter L for the left-hand drive. And then they would have places where they would handwrite in the rest of the information on the card. There would be the engine number, there would be they'd have all kinds of data on the distributor and the wheels. By the way, the wheels they always listed as 16-inch, but that was the wheels they put on the records cars. All the cars that were sold commercially in this country anyway had 15-inch wheels. So the build cards were filled out by hand, and there would be an engine number would be written in by hand, and but the only stamped in number was the car number. In early 54, they got their engines, they got them from Morris instead of from Austin. And the engine plates on the BN1 starting in around, I don't know, April or so in 54, I'd have to go look. My memory is not as good as I get old as before. There would be a new series of engine number, but the new engine numbers from Morris have they all had a 1B in the front of them, but the Morris engine numbers had a letter M at the end. It wasn't for 100M, it was M for Morris. And they ran those separately, and down up to about August of 54, again, the chassis number was stamped and the engine number was handwritten. But then they decided to do a unified numbering system. And that unified system meant that they would have the engine number, the numerical part of the engine number, match the numerical part of the chassis number. So now you have to think, what were the engines doing? The engines came from Morris at this point, and they had to have had a number plate on them for warranty purposes, if nothing else. So they would take the engines into BMC Longbridge factory, and they would spray paint them with the BMC, metallic gray-green engine paint, and they would go put them away in a warehouse for the engines. Now they were going to have a new bodies coming from Johnson that would be dropped onto the assembly line. The thing was that they didn't know what the engine number was going to be when they pulled it out of the warehouse. And the engines were not stored necessarily in numerical order. So what they did was they took the engine number out and put the engine out and put it in the chassis. Now there was a number. So what happens is the chassis, they had to have a chassis plate made up that had that number so the two would match. Therefore, you find that on the build cards, the engine number is filled in. I think it's stamped. Look, just a second. Let me get a card to look at it real quick. I apologize. I couldn't find it that quickly, but the engine number is filled in by hand, but the body number is not. And the reason the body number is not is because it would have BN1 or BN2, and it would have an L written in, but that's all. It wouldn't have the rest of the number for the chassis, because the engine number gave them the rest of the number for the engine, for the chassis. They would leave off the 1B and the M, but they would have the digits in the middle, 228, 223867. The engine is 1B 223867 M. The chassis is BN1L. And then for the rest of the number, you have to go look at the engine plate. So that was the way they did those things back then. And give me your question again, because I got it.
I was asking you what books or what literature would you think would be helpful?
Okay, so here's the point. Because the chassis number was going to be out of sequential order because the engine numbers were out of sequential order. And also because when they built the cars, the chassis sort of went down the line in numerical order, but there'd be exceptions. But mostly from that point on in 54, when they wrote the change point for in the workshop manual, in the service parts list, say they changed a starter or a generator or something or other to a different one, or I can't remember what all the, some of the cars they upgraded some component. And anyway, they would have a change point and they would give you a chassis number, or they might give you a body number. But the body numbers were out of sequence. The engine numbers were out of sequence. And therefore the change point, if you had those numbers, they were out of sequence. The higher number could have been built before the lower number actually went on down the assembly line. Therefore, in the reality, the change points, the way to tell when it changed was the build date, and you don't have the build dates in the books to tell you that. And a lot of people, so you have to look at these change points with a grain of salt or two or three, because they're not literally to be taken as gospel.
The change points are also listed in the service part manuals as well, right? There's a body.
Yeah, that's the point.
Yep.
Wait, now in the manuals, in the workshop manuals, no, but the service parts list, yes, and that's the problem, because you know that on a body something or other they made a change, but you don't know whether that all the body numbers were higher were built after that. Some of those bodies might have been built before that with a lower number. And then they did the change points. What the guy walking on the production line, as he reads the numbers off, that's where he saw on the first one on that car, but he doesn't know that there weren't higher numbers that went through the assembly line before that one, because all the numbers were out of order.
Okay, so
bigger problem with the BN1s and BN2s than it is for later the 3000s, I think.
So far, you've mentioned the two of the body service manual, the mechanical service manual, the manual, and Pigot's book.
Yeah.
How about the concours guidelines? Are they worth buying?
Oh, heavens, yeah. Yeah, you caught me. Okay. Absolutely,
that was a softball for you, Roger.
that's right. Well, my mind kind of wanders and wanders and wanders. And I asked you, what was the question? Because it's a problem I have with my memory sometimes. But yes, the concours guidelines, but again, you have to take them with a grain of salt, because wherever they list body or chassis numbers in there, those are not necessarily assured that everything with a higher number had that part and everything with a lower number didn't.
Okay. I'm going to ask you something. If you could have any Healy in the world, what would it be?
Oh, I was writing, that one is one that I'd never thought about. I was writing it down. Because I want to also take and point out something else related. Okay. Well, I think there's two things. One is I really enjoyed in many ways driving my Mark I BT7 nicer than my 100, because the 100, well, the engine has a little more vibration. It's cramped and it's harder getting in and out of. And I didn't have a hard top for it either. I love the car. That's why it's the only one that I have left of mine. But the 3000, when I think about it, if you were thinking about a rare Healy, 3000 Mark II BN7, they only made 355 of those. You know, that's like half the number of 100Ms, for example. It's a very smooth driving car with a hard top on it. It's very quiet. It's very strong, has a hell of a lot more poop in the engine, even than a 100M, you know. And so I would say for comfort, I would pick the Mark II, a BN7, because I love the two-seat style. But for pure originality and curiosity, I would pick the BN1. And the only problem with a 100S is where you're going to drive it. Where can you park it where you are going to be worrying yourself to death over it? But can I offer another answer to a similar related question?
Please go ahead.
Okay, if I what would be other cars that I would be attracted to buying, older cars? And there I have this little list. I have only 4 of them. One is that 66 Alpha Duetto boat tail that I saw. I love that car. That the design on that car, I don't think much of the Italian engineering, but that was a beautiful car. That's
Do you
number
hear that, Craig Hess?
Pardon?
Does Craig Hess hear that?
Good.
Craig has an Alpha, a little newer one.
Okay. Another one is the E-Type fixed head coupe. Now it turns out that around 2008 or 9, I can't remember exactly when, I restored an E-Type Roadster. And I took over after somebody had already taken it all apart. And I did the only thing on that car that I didn't do, I did the body work. I didn't spray the paint on it. I did the wiring. I did the upholstery. I put the whole bloody thing together. I didn't do the engine, the gearbox, or the differential. But when the guy had done the differential, and that's where on the E-Type, they have a handbrake. And when I was doing the front brakes, I discovered the calipers were all frozen. So I decided, I think I'm going to check the rear brakes, because they were all, you know, supposedly redone. They were frozen solid too. And so that car, it was a Roadster, so it was easy to get into. But and I love the design, except that I like the cigar shape of the fixed top. The other car is the Citroen DS series. That was they made a 2-door convertible. If anybody knows the DLs, just think of the The nose is the same, and the rear of the body is much more sleek, like a roadster. But they made a hardtop type, and they made a convertible. And for a design, that I think is beautiful. I don't know, I can't answer about the hydraulics of it all. And the last one was the BMW Z8, which was built in 99, 2003, that time frame. And the only thing I have against that is that I love the body, but it's a very heavy car, and I wish to hell they'd put their little smooth 6-cylinder engine in it, because I think a Z6 would have been great. But those I'm talking about automotive design. I'm not talking about performance. Okay.
Sure. Well, you know, for years I watched Roger on the Healey mail list, and in the early days, Roger would engage in these long discussions about modified Healeys. And I'm going to ask you, Roger, what do you think of Nasty Boys?
I'll tell you, I have, when the thing is done well, I have great admiration for it. I have a very dear friend who passed away about 3 years ago, Kent Lacey. Some of you people may know him or know of him. And he built a V8, a Nasty Boy. In fact, he was doing another one at the time that he passed away. And I don't mind, and you know, there's enough of these cars that are being done correctly that people can have to refer to. But when you have the extra power in that, I think for those of people that like power, it's a nice body to put them in. So why not?
Matter of fact, Ken helped me a great deal in doing my Nasty Boy, and he was, Kent took a factory 100M and put a Ford V8 in it, mainly because the original person that had the motor wouldn't sell him the motor. And
Wasn't that a horrible story?
That is a true story.
I know.
There was, Kent knew where the original motor was for that 100M, and the person wouldn't sell it to him, and apparently kept it under his bench somewhere. So Kent said, all right, I'll put a V8 in it. And the car looked like a 100M, except for, and it was very well done. Just a perfect 100M with a V8 motor in it.
One thing you may not know is that Kent offered to trade him a brand new Harley for that engine, and the guy turned him down.
Yeah. Well, all right. Well, I've asked all my questions, so now I'm going to turn it over to anyone else. If anyone else has a question for Roger, please feel free to ask away.
Roger, I'm Jake Krieger. We've talked a few times on the phone.
Okay.
And your wealth of knowledge and insight has proven to be very helpful to me and numerous others. So I thank you very much.
Most welcome.
I asked you a question some time back, and I'm still in the weeds on it. I have a late BN2, a May date build, and I have come across the possibility that some people have come up with that these later cars were fitted with 1-inch wheel cylinders in the front, not 7/8 inch. And I think I brought that up to you in one of our conversations, and the prevailing opinion seems to be they were always 7/8 inches. But every time I get convinced that that's the case, somebody comes up in one of the forums or another and says, oh no, I've taken apart a number of BN2s and they had the 1-inch wheel cylinders in them. And I know the BN4, which had the drum brakes, they did have the 1-inch. So the logic is, to me, during some sort of transition on the assembly line in the later BN2s, why wouldn't they put the 1-inch cylinders in there? I can't find any verification one way or another, except through people like you. I've seen no documentation whatsoever, although it supposedly exists, that they did fit 1-inch. I did find it in one parts source, a parts manual, an old Beck catalog. They say it had a 1-inch wheel cylinder in the later cars. So what's your take? I think I know it, but I'd like to hear it.
I've got two things that come to mind. One is my bad memory. Can you tell me, did the BN1s have 1-inch cylinders?
I think yes, the BM1s had a little bit different casting. It was 1-inch. And then
Okay.
when they
But the
theoretically,
cylinders are interchangeable on the backing plates.
yes,
So one possibility is somebody thought that he would to be better to have the 1-inch, or maybe he mistakenly bought the 1-inch and put them on. And so it could be, if you know, you'd have to know if people were seeing a bunch of cars that were relatively close in build time, they all had the 1-inch. That tells you that, wonder if the factory decided to try it out before they did the BN4s. I didn't remember that the BN4s had the 1-inch. So I'm just saying, I don't know the provenance of the build that exactly, so I usually go by what's in the book. I'm trying to think for a minute. If you have, it would be if you get more pressure on the brakes, if you had the larger one.
yeah, some people have explained that to me, and it kind of dices back and forth. It just seems more logical, since they had 1-inch in the rear and they increased the width of the brake shoes. Why would they put the 1-inch in the front? But again, other than this Beck catalog and John Harper, I think you may know of him, who wrote up a lot of information on the history of various Healey's over the years, and he's still around. He said that he worked with a factory at one point, and there was a document, an internal document, where they said they fitted the 1-inch, but he can't prove it. He cannot come up with a copy of this document. And it's just, I'm similar to you. I like details and I like originality. And I like to think I'm doing things as close to the originality as I can. And this is one of those little questions that dogs me.
Well, I'll tell you, I'd have to think about it, or maybe talk to somebody or drive in a car that had it to tell whether it makes sense, mechanically or not. But if when I've done a few things to my car that are not truly original. I put in 100M pistons, and I put in 100M cam. And the reason I did that is because my friend John Hodgman said, at your altitude, because when I would accelerate, I drive it mostly at about 2,500 to 3,000 RPM.
Right.
I'm trying to get the best mileage out of it and enjoy my being on the road. I'm not an aggressive driver. But when I would try and accelerate it at this altitude, I live at 5,200 feet, and I drive up to 11,000 feet. And this, I would put my foot down, and the speedometer would go up at a steady rate until about 4,000 RPM. Then it would, and it would continue to go up, but at the acceleration would drop off in rate. And so I put in the bigger pistons in the 100M cam. The cam I got, by the way, was an Elgin cam that was a street grind. It wasn't a racing cam. It was more of a street grind. It doesn't have as high a lift, but it has a broader peak at the high point. But anyway, I love the thing, and it works just fine. But that's one thing that I've done to modify, but you don't see it. I didn't change the carbs. I still have the same carbs. I had a little spring company that up the road in Longmont, Colorado, just 7 miles away, that I took in, and they made up for me reproductions of 100M spring sets. I don't have any left now, but I've had saved one, and I put it in when I redid my carburetor the last time, just to put those in. You don't see that, and I'm not sure how much difference. I didn't change the vacuum advance either on the thing. But those are the mechanical things that I've changed, but you don't see them, and I don't mind taking advantage of the benefits. But there's a couple of other changes that I've done that I want to mention, because one of them is in one of the articles in my book. It's about brake lights. One of the problems that I have, the back boot of the car, boot lid of the car says Austin-Healey. At least on the 3000s, it says 3000. That's a bigger thing to see. But just the Austin-Healey, you can't read it when you're driving behind. And people tailgate me wondering what the heck I'm driving. And I like to be able to, flash my brake lights, but the brake lights don't come on with a hydraulic system until you actually are starting to get drag and pressure
Get the
built
brakes.
in the system. So I noticed that I had an 87 Toyota Camry, and it seemed to me that the brake lights came on when I just would start to depress the brake pedal. And mine does that out of my BMWs too. And I figured they've got to be having a micro switch actuated by the brake pedal. So how can you do that on the Austin-Healey? And I wrote an article about it in one of the USA magazines, and I think that article is in my book.
I believe it is.
And it shows the switches. Now, in the 100, it's relatively easy to install the switch because it's mounted on a bracket that I built that attaches with 2 of the 3 screws of both the throttle pedal bracket to the foot box, but they're on the engine side on the slope of the foot box. And once you get that in there and you can run the wiring up, like people, you can't, unless you get your nose on the ground looking up at the foot box, and you'll see an extra wiring harness running across above the insulation, you don't know that I've done anything there. But I can adjust that thing so that the brake light, and it's in parallel with the hydraulic. So if the hydraulic is working, it doesn't get any credit. And if it quits, nobody knows that it gave up. But the thing is that I adjust it so that, when you touch your foot on the brake pedal, it has a certain amount of movement till the push rod nests into the back of the piston. The piston is stopped by a ring in the master cylinder, but the piston can be drawn back a few thousands, 20 thousandths, 30 thousandths more. You've got that little bit of free play, and then the piston is going to move forward a little bit before it closes off the bleed valve, the valve for refilling the cylinder coming from the reservoir. So I adjust that switch lever, the actuation of the lever, so that it actuates somewhere between when I lose the free play of the linkage pushing the piston and just before the piston closes off the screw for filling from the reservoir. And I can flash my brake lights and I don't slow down whatsoever.
Speaking of brake lights, do you favor LED lighting in your car now?
I haven't changed that, but for my brake light, I do have some LED lights, and that was the second thing I was going to mention. And that is, my friend who has the other BN1 I worked on, he has a Porsche and he wanted to put some lighting up high in the back window of his Porsche. And he found a light bar that's 11 inches long and it's only about 3/4 of an inch high. And it is actually, it's LED lights and it's split in half in 2 sections. So you've got 2 sections here. And I made brackets so I could attach it. Now, remember, I have a BN1, and so I have a metal bar running through the bottom edge of my top.
Right.
And I can also attach it to the back edge of my tonneau cover. For a 2+2 seater, it's a different problem because the top has a whole ring of 10X fasteners running around it. But for the 2-seaters, and this is good, I did one for a BN6 as well. I have 2 little clamps that have all kinds of rubber pads on them so they don't scratch the paint, they don't damage the material of the top. And this bar is attached to the clamps and they're held on with a little Allen head screws. From there, I have a wire that threads around the edges of under the top, and it goes into the cockpit, and there's a plug. And there's I think four, well, there's three wires, I think. There's a left and a right hot wire, and then there's a common ground wire. So, but anyway, those wires I run to the left rear light socket for the tail lights. Now those are held with single bullet connectors. I changed those two for the left and the right. I put a dual bullet connector, just like, because they're just like you have for you have dual bullet connectors in a lot of places on the car. But anyway, and then I put a second bullet into each of those for each of the two hot wires going up. So if I turn my turn signal on, the right side or the left side of the bar lights up along with the tail lights. And when I put my brake light on, it does too. And believe me, it is bright.
And it's probably saved you without you knowing it. It's probably saved you without you knowing it.
Well, I maybe, whenever guy starts to go close to me, I just tap my brake pedal very lightly and the lights flash and he backs off usually.
I tap my single digit sometimes. That works too, without the LED lights.
Yeah. Well, the thing about the LED lights is I didn't really want to change the structure of the light sockets and all that stuff, and back and for the front ones, and then for the headlights. Another thing is I was driving with the F700, I think.
Yeah, F700.
Yeah, because my car was bought in Dusseldorf, Germany, and I'm sure it came with bulb lights in 1955.
Mhm.
But lately, when I was driving, I don't know if I changed them before I went. No, I didn't change them before I went up to that concourse in, God, I should know the name of that town. Anyway, when I got back, I've been collecting used field beam headlights. And I used to run those. These are Lucas used field beam headlights. And I swapped them out. And the way I did it so I could go to either type is inside the headlight bowl. I took and put bullet connectors on the wires coming through, and I put bullet connectors on the pigtails coming out of the headlight.
Just unplug them.
And so then I can just swap out the headlights, one type for the other, and you never know it was different from it looking at anything else.
Do we have any more questions for Roger?
Yeah, Roger, this is Les Roberts. I enjoyed your section on installing an engine in the book. I just had one question about it, and that was whether how far up would you recommend the frame be when you swing the gearbox and the engine in to install it?
I'm trying to remember. Are you talking about a 4 or a 6 cylinder?
A 6-cylinder. It's a BT7 3000 1960.
Isn't there a picture in my?
The picture is really good, and
Wasn't the car
my
on the
question
ground?
was how high up the frame should be from the ground when you actually swing it in. There's a picture of you swinging it in and all of that, and I understand all of that. I just wanted to know how high up you recommend the frame be so that you can actually swing it down.
No, I understand your question, but let me ask you, in the picture in the book, I don't have the book open in front of me, but in the picture in the book, wasn't the car on its wheels, on its tires?
There was no picture of the car. There's a picture of the engine and it going in, but there is actually no picture that shows the wheels of the car. So I wasn't sure if it was just sitting on the wheels or if it was sitting on jack stands.
Hold on just one quick second. I'm going to look for, I have a picture. I'm going to look it up real quick here.
Yeah, this is Rich Masnardi. When I did mine, my car was sitting on the wheels.
Okay,
know,
that's fine.
I don't think mine was. I'm not sure. I wasn't on a lift. It was either on jack stands were on its wheels. And I've got another picture that maybe isn't in the book that I can look for real quickly here.
Yeah, mine wasn't jacked up very high because if it
Yeah,
was on
that's what
jack
I was
stands, it
wondering.
wasn't very high.
That's what I was wondering, if it was sitting on the wheels, if that was sufficient, or if it needed to be up higher on jack stands.
Well,
This is Bob Easterbrooks. I have a BT7 and mine sat right on the ground when I pulled it out. It wasn't jacked up. It was right on the wheels.
And you pulled the engine in gearbox?
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, okay,
Yeah, I did the same thing when I put it in.
okay.
just a
Well,
minute
that's
here.
good. That answers the question, I think. Thanks.
The engine was in.
And the other thing, Roger, is the town you're trying to think of, Deadwood, up in the Black Hills?
Yes, Deadwood, that's what I was trying to think of.
There
Thank
you go. Sometimes it takes a lot of us to remember anything.
When we left Deadwood, we drove up to see Tower Rock up in Wyoming, that monument. And from there, we then drove down. And at the same time, if you've ever been out in the west this was in September, actually a little late for thunderstorms, but anyway, there were thunderstorms coming across Wyoming from the west, and we were on the eastern edge of it. And we were racing to get down into Colorado before the thunderstorms hit. And I only got a few drops on my car, but my God.
Yes, beautiful.
Roger, this is Rich Mastronardi. I wanted to thank you, first off, for all the advice you gave me while I was restoring my car. I started out using Rich Chrysler as a go-to guy to answer some questions that weren't, I couldn't find anywhere, but I used your book that you wrote with Gary Anderson extensively, and a series of articles you wrote. I think you wrote 37 articles that were in one of the Healey Club archives. And those two things, in addition to the normal stuff of using the parts manual and the workshop manual, and of course the concours guidelines, were invaluable. So my car, after 17 years of working on it, I took it to concours. I took it to the Enclave in September, and I was awarded gold concours. So I want to thank you.
Very good.
Yeah, so
Really?
it was the first car I ever owned, still own. I've owned it since 1966. It's a 61 BT7. And it was very close to the end of the Mark I production. So it had a number of things that weren't, they were, transitional items that drove me crazy.
Right.
Just drove me absolutely bonkers. But since I had the car, I bought it from the original owner, and it only had 19,000 miles on when I bought it.
Oh, wow.
So when I took it apart, I photographed everything, and I had all the original parts for the most part. I think the only part I found that wasn't original was the fuel pump. Everything else was original. All the fasteners. There were a few fasteners that I replaced when I was in college that were bought at the local hardware store, but I was very fortunate to have all those parts. So, but thank you.
Well, yeah, that's great. I'm trying to think here. Do you have a copy of my book?
I have a copy of this one.
No, not that one, the new one.
The new one, no.
Okay, well, in the first part of it, when you mentioned you had all the original fasteners, there were the way I was keeping track of them. See, when I did my car, or when I did this BJ8, where it was the first time it had ever been apart, never been apart, and I tracked all the fasteners. By then, I was having, I did it by wiring the fasteners for each item. I'd clean them up, and then I would wire them up on a wire, and I have a little tag with a number that had the number on it, that the number of the bag they came out of. And I gave it to a plater, and then I tell him, I want you to hang it and dip it. I don't want you to tumble it. And when they did that, then I would get these back and I just find the wire with the tag and the number, and I know all the fasteners next to it, and I put them back in the bag with part, and then what all the part would be back on the car with the same fasteners. The first time I did that, the guy didn't pay attention to my little request, and he tumbled them. And I ended up with sections of wire with 2 or 3 fasteners on it, and maybe a tag with a number. And then when I laid it all out on my dining room table, I then found it really wasn't that difficult, because I've been doing these things for many, many years. I was able to sort out and get all the fasteners in the right bag, even though I didn't have them with the numbers that I would pick, because I knew what they were supposed to be.
Are you almost done?
Maybe. I knew what they were supposed to be, and you can say, well, some are than usual. Okay, that one's got to be from this for sure. But other than that, they maybe didn't get in the right one, but they were identical to the right where they used to be. So that didn't matter.
Yeah.
19,000 miles, Rich. That must have been the 3rd fuel pump that they put in there.
Could have been. All I know is which one was in there when I bought the car. And I always had issues with it. Every once in a while, I actually had a piece of iron pipe that I would tap on it, take the back seat off and tap on it to get it to go.
I'll tell you
I
what
was
will throw up fuel pumps real good though. There's debris that wasn't cleaned out of the gas tank when you restored the car. Because I had a friend who had a car and he restored it and done everything, but he didn't do a good job with his gas tank. And we were driving home from show in Denver, I think, and he had to stop every few miles, and he would go under and he would tap his fuel pump. But then I had a problem where it was bad and I couldn't get it to do that. And when I went in, there was so much gunk collected, rust filings of rust debris on the fuel filter. Now on the 100, the fuel filter, you can drop out of the bottom of the fuel pump with a pump installed on the car. And if you had keep along some clean fuel filters, you could replace it and do that. On a 6-cylinder pump, you can't, because it's under one of the caps, the rectangular caps, and you have to take that off. And that's on the bottom part anyway, so you can't do that. So then the next best thing is to take along an extra fuel pump that you can swap out.
I have to say, when I started the restoration and looking at the concours, I was surprised to find out that this fuel pump that I had in the car for 40 years or so was not the original. And I found a guy actually lived in the
It
same
was
town.
a 6-cylinder car.
Yes, it's a BT7.
Well, how did they find out that it wasn't original? You
Well, when
can't
I looked
the
at,
car on the ground, you can't see it that well.
well, when I took it off, it was obvious that it didn't look like the picture in
Oh,
the
okay.
concours guidelines. Yeah. And it was actually a guy here lived in the same town in Massachusetts with me who used to restore British car fuel pumps. He took a look at it and he says, I got enough parts here to build you the same as the original one. So that's what I have in there now.
Yeah. I'll tell you, with those fuel pumps, the diaphragm has to keep it centered. They have 11 little brass discs that go into a slot. And now with the pumps that you get, they have a plastic frame that has 4 kind of like a spectacle shaped double eye things around it. Some of those things fit in very nicely and loosely. Others are stiff when they are, the dimensions of them aren't, the plastic isn't quite right. And they can sometimes bind, and that will keep the diaphragm from returning after it's drawn up under the spring pressure to go back down. I always like to use the 11 little rollers because it's a little trick to learn how to get them in, but once you do, they never cause a problem with the thing hanging up.
Any more questions for Roger?
Pardon?
I'm asking if there's any more questions for you.
I want to tell Roger that I recently acquired about 200 pounds of original fasteners I don't have as much as you do, but I have more than I'll ever need.
Okay, but now let me ask you, have you restored them all, refinished them all?
Oh, no. But I have cleaned them and I have actually de-rusted them, but no, I have not restored them.
Okay, but I'll tell you, when you're gonna need one, what I did, I don't have all that many. I mean, I have one cabinet just with BSF and the rest is UNF. I went and got them all restored, and on each cabinet, I filed them by manufacturer and by size. So I can, when I need something, I can go find it very quickly.
The vast majority of mine are UNF, and I have sorted them by size. So I've done that, and I've cleaned them, and I've degreased them. So I've done a little work.
Are all the BSF ones finished in black oxide?
On my car, I think they
Oxide?
are, but the ones that I have that I acquired, they probably were originally, and they probably still are. They weren't in
Okay,
bad
well,
shape.
Yeah, the problem is to have them redone in groups. I have a bucket of stuff I haven't had refinished, but you know, the prices have gone up. I used to
Right.
get a 2-pound coffee can of stuff done for like $50.
Mm.
But I don't have 2-pound coffee cans full, and they're up about $75 now. So anyway,
So Jake, the 200 pounds you have, is that in value or is that in weight of your parts, your fasteners?
It's in the weight. The value, I think, is probably maybe $1.50, $2, something like that.
There you go.
Any more questions? I want to thank Roger for, first of all, agreeing to do this tonight, and then moreover for all the contributions he's made to the Austin-Healey world and the concours restoration of Austin-Healey's, and just the willingness he's taken over the years to help people out that want to do their car the right way. So Roger, thank you very much. I appreciate it. Peter, our next event, I think, is our birthday party. Do you want to talk about that for a second?
Sure, yeah. It's at the Wayside Inn. Those of you who are in Massachusetts or Southern New Hampshire, Connecticut, it's at the Wayside Inn on Sunday, May 7th, I believe. I don't have that right in front of me right now. But it is our 48th anniversary. And so I did send out a reminder email earlier today to the New England members as it relates to that. We're limited to 56 guests at that. So please get your registration into Linda Hakala by next Friday, the 28th is the closing of for the joining us for the birthday party. So certainly look forward to seeing as many as we can there at the birthday party.
All right, thank you, Peter. And again, thank you all for joining us tonight. I think it was very entertaining and informative, and we'll see you down the road. Thanks again.
Rick,
Thanks, Roger.
I'd just like to also thank you for having me on. I appreciate it. I hope I didn't drag things out too much.
No, I think everyone was very interested to hear what you had to say, Roger. And, you know, we don't get a chance to talk that often with people who have made a great contribution to our club and to our Healey's. And usually when you just read a magazine or read a book, you don't get the same kind of feeling that you do when you get something like this. So you're more than welcome to be invited, and we really enjoyed having you here.
Well, thank you again.
And Roger, if you're ever interested, the second Monday of the month, we always have our technical conference call. So you're more than welcome to join us anytime. The second Monday of the month, 7 o'clock. I'll send you the copy of the link. It's a recurring link. And we typically average, similar to this, we had, 35, 40 folks on this call tonight. That's typically what we average for those. And we just take different sorts of questions. Mike Salter's active in that, and Rick Neville, Ken Beck, Bob Ewell, Bob Abbott are all some of our experts that join that call on a regular basis.
It's a very valuable source.
Well, I appreciate the invite. I'll try and see if I can remember to.
I'll send you a note on that, Roger. And thanks, Jake, for the comment. Appreciate it.
Okay, guys.
Good night, folks.
Good night.
Good night.
Thank you.
Nice
Thank
meeting
you.
you, Roger. In
Thank you.
person.
Okay, maybe we'll meet someday.
I hope so. I hope so.